What you're about to witness didn't just destroy Ellen DeGeneres' career. It exposed a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of Hollywood and left the FBI investigating live television for the first time in American history. But the most shocking part isn't that Ellen ordered armed security to arrest Jonathan Roumie on live TV in front of 20 million viewers. It's what happened when those handcuffs clicked shut that made every law enforcement officer in that studio throw down their badges and refuse to complete the arrest. 37 seconds of raw footage that 3 major networks and 2 government agencies tried to bury forever, but someone leaked it anyway, and it broke the internet in ways that terrify the entertainment industry to this day. Ellen DeGeneres, the woman who built an empire on destroying people with a smile, signals to off-duty LAPD officers with that predatory grin, pointing at Jonathan like she's ordering an execution. "Arrest him now," she commands on live television. "We have evidence of fraud." The officers move forward with handcuffs ready. The audience screams in confusion. But Jonathan Roumie doesn't resist. He doesn't call for lawyers. Instead, he does something so powerful, so utterly devastating, that within seconds every armed officer in that studio is backing away like they've seen a ghost. He speaks 7 words that not only stopped the arrest, but made the lead officer remove his badge and throw it at Ellen's feet on live television. 7 words that turned a planned humiliation into the most watched spiritual awakening in television history. 7 words that made Ellen realize she had just tried to arrest the wrong man on the wrong day with the wrong charges. The cameras kept rolling, but what happened next was so explosive, so absolutely earth-shattering, that by the time the show ended, Ellen was no longer just finished in Hollywood. She was facing federal charges herself. And neither was anyone who witnessed what unfolded when the man who plays Jesus looked his accusers in the eyes and revealed a secret that changed everything. This isn't just the story of a talk show host losing her mind on live television. This is the story of how a carefully orchestrated conspiracy to destroy faith-based entertainment backfired so catastrophically that it exposed the most powerful blackmail network in Hollywood history. Ellen hadn't just planned to humiliate Jonathan Roumie. She had been ordered to do it by forces so dark and influential that when their plan collapsed on live TV, it triggered the largest FBI investigation into entertainment industry corruption since the McCarthy era. What Ellen's audience didn't know was that 3 weeks before this interview, she had received an ultimatum from her own handlers. The Chosen had become too powerful, too influential, converting too many people away from the godless messaging they needed to maintain control. Jonathan Roumie wasn't just an actor playing Jesus. He had become a genuine threat to their entire system. The order was simple: destroy him publicly and permanently, or lose everything she had built. Ellen thought she was saving her career. She had no idea she was walking into a trap that would expose the puppet masters who had been controlling Hollywood's narrative for decades. The arrest warrant she planned to serve on live television wasn't just fake. It was part of a federal sting operation that had been building for months. But the most terrifying part wasn't Ellen's desperation to maintain power. It wasn't even the conspiracy she was unwittingly serving. It was what Jonathan knew about all of it before he ever walked onto that stage, and why he chose to walk into their trap anyway. What Ellen's handlers didn't realize was that the man they ordered her to destroy had been 3 steps ahead of them from the very beginning, and he was about to prove that some battles are won not by fighting back, but by letting your enemies destroy themselves on live television. 72 hours before the most catastrophic interview in television history, Ellen DeGeneres was locked in her private conference room at Warner Bros. With people whose names never appear in Hollywood credits, but whose power determines who rises and who falls in the entertainment industry. These weren't her usual producers or network executives. These were the shadow handlers who had been pulling strings behind Ellen's empire for over a decade, and they had just delivered an ultimatum that would either save her career or destroy her life. "The Chosen is converting too many people," the lead handler said. sliding a thick file across the mahogany table. Roumie has become a problem. He's undoing years of cultural programming. The numbers don't lie. Church attendance is up 40% in demographics that watch his show. That stops now. Ellen opened the file, and her blood ran cold. It contained fabricated evidence of financial fraud, fake donation records, and manufactured testimonies from hired actors claiming Jonathan had sexually harassed them. But the most chilling part was the final page. A federal arrest warrant template, ready to be filled out and served on live television. Ellen's hands shook as she realized what they were asking her to do. "You want me to have him arrested on my show? With fake charges?" The handler's smile was colder than winter. "Ellen, you've been living in a fantasy if you think your success was ever really yours. We made you. We can unmake you just as easily. Jonathan Roumie gets destroyed on your show, or we release the real files we have on you. And trust me, those aren't fabricated." The room fell silent as Ellen understood the depth of her predicament. She had always suspected her meteoric rise to power came with strings attached, but she never imagined the strings were chains. Over the next 48 hours, Ellen transformed from reluctant participant to eager executioner. She coordinated with off-duty LAPD officers who were told they were participating in a reality show arrest for a method actor who insisted on staying in character. She rehearsed her lines with ruthless precision, practiced her expressions of mock surprise and righteous indignation. Most importantly, she convinced herself that what she was doing was justified. If he's really a man of God, she told her reflection the night before the interview, then God can save him. If not, then he deserves what's coming. She had no idea that every phone call, every meeting, every rehearsal had been recorded by federal agents who had been building a case against her handlers for 3 years. And she certainly had no idea that Jonathan Roumie already knew exactly what she was planning to do. While Ellen rehearsed her lines for what she believed would be Jonathan's destruction, the man who plays Jesus was kneeling on the cold hardwood floor of his Chicago apartment at 3:17 a.m., not praying for protection, but praying for his enemies. What Ellen and her handlers didn't know was that Jonathan had received a phone call 6 days earlier that changed everything. Not from a dying child or a concerned producer, but from a federal agent who had been monitoring the conspiracy against him for months. "Mr. Roumie, we know about the plan to arrest you on Ellen's show," Agent Sarah Martinez had said during that late-night call. "We've been building a case against the network that's been controlling Hollywood's narrative for years. Ellen is just a puppet, but she's about to become the key to bringing down the entire operation. We need you to go through with the interview." Jonathan's response had surprised even the seasoned FBI agent. "Agent Martinez, I was planning to go anyway. Some battles aren't fought with lawyers or evidence. They're fought with truth." What the federal agents didn't understand, what Ellen's handlers couldn't have predicted, was that Jonathan had been preparing for this moment not for days or weeks, but for his entire life. The scars on his arms weren't just from a suicide attempt 8 years ago. They were from the night he discovered the same shadow network had been responsible for destroying his father's faith-based film company in the 1990s. His father had died believing he was a failure, never knowing that his company had been systematically sabotaged by the same forces now targeting his son. The morning of the interview, Jonathan didn't call lawyers or security teams. Instead, he made a phone call that would terrify Ellen's handlers more than any legal threat could. He called his prayer network, not just a few church friends, but a coordinated group of believers across 50 countries who had been interceding for the exposure of corruption in entertainment for over a decade. "Today is the day," he told them simply. "The enemy is about to expose himself on live television. Pray not for my protection, but for their redemption." As he hung up the phone and picked up his father's old Bible, Jonathan smiled with the quiet confidence of a man who knew that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk directly into your enemy's trap and let God turn their weapons against them. When Jonathan Roumie walked onto Ellen's stage that Thursday afternoon, the atmosphere was electric with tension that even the camera operators could feel in their bones. Ellen's opening wasn't designed to draw blood. It was designed to justify what was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with a smile that never reached her eyes, "today, we're exposing one of Hollywood's most dangerous frauds. Jonathan Roumie has stolen millions from faithful Christians while pretending to be their savior." The audience shifted uncomfortably as Ellen held up the fabricated documents her handlers had provided. "We have bank records, testimonies, and evidence that this man has been running the largest religious con game in American history." Jonathan sat quietly, his hands folded, watching Ellen perform the script she had rehearsed for days. When she finished her accusations, he simply said, "Ellen, are you sure you want to do this?" The question caught her off guard. There was something in his voice. Not fear, not anger, but a deep sadness that made her stomach twist. "Of course I'm sure," she snapped, but her confidence was already beginning to crack. "The evidence speaks for itself. You've defrauded millions of people out of their hard-earned money." Jonathan nodded slowly and reached into his jacket pocket, causing the off-duty officers positioned around the studio to tense. "Ellen, before you proceed, I need to ask you something. Do you believe in redemption?" Ellen's handlers were screaming through her earpiece to move forward with the arrest, but something about Jonathan's calm demeanor was making her second-guess everything. "Jonathan, you're deflecting. We have proof of your crimes." She gestured toward the officers, her voice rising with desperation. "Officers, please arrest this man for fraud and theft." The lead officer, Detective Mike Rodriguez, stepped forward with handcuffs. But as he approached Jonathan, something extraordinary happened. Jonathan stood calmly, extended his hands, and looked directly into the detective's eyes. "Officer, I want you to know that I forgive you for what you're about to do. You're just following orders." The detective stopped mid-step, handcuffs frozen in the air. In 20 years of law enforcement, he had never heard a suspect offer forgiveness before being arrested. "Sir," he said, his voice uncertain, "you're being arrested for fraud. Do you understand the charges?" Jonathan smiled with a peace that seemed to fill the entire studio. "Officer, I understand more than you know. But before you put those handcuffs on me, I need to tell you something. This arrest warrant is fake. Ellen isn't trying to expose fraud. She's trying to commit it, live on television." The studio erupted in gasps as Jonathan continued. "And Officer Rodriguez, I know this because the FBI has been recording every conversation Ellen has had about this setup for the past 3 weeks." Detective Rodriguez's face went white as Jonathan spoke 7 words that would haunt Ellen for the rest of her life. "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." At that moment, as if responding to those words, Rodriguez's police radio crackled to life with a voice that made Ellen's blood freeze. "Detective Rodriguez, this is Agent Martinez, FBI. Do not complete that arrest. The warrant is fabricated. You are now part of a federal investigation." The handcuffs slipped from Rodriguez's hands and clattered to the studio floor as 20 million viewers watched Ellen's carefully orchestrated plan collapse in real time. Her face transformed from predatory confidence to absolute terror as she realized she hadn't just tried to arrest an innocent man. She had just confessed to conspiracy on live television in front of the entire country. The studio fell into a silence so profound that the only sound was Ellen's ragged breathing as she watched her world collapse in real time. Detective Rodriguez slowly removed his badge and placed it on Ellen's desk with trembling hands. "Ma'am, in 20 years of law enforcement, I've never been asked to arrest someone with fabricated evidence. I can't be part of this." But Jonathan wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and did something that sent shockwaves through every television network in America. "Agent Martinez," he said, holding the phone to his microphone. "Are you listening?" A clear, authoritative voice filled the studio. "Yes, Mr. Roumie. We've been recording this entire conversation. Ellen DeGeneres, you are now officially under federal investigation for conspiracy, fraud, and attempting to use law enforcement to commit a crime on live television." Ellen's legs gave out, and she collapsed into her chair, her carefully applied makeup beginning to streak down her face. "This isn't possible," she whispered, but Jonathan was already connecting another call that would shatter her remaining composure. "Ellen, I'd like you to meet someone," he said as a familiar voice came through the speakers, the voice of her primary handler, the man who had orchestrated this entire setup. But he wasn't calling to support her. "Ellen, you've outlived your usefulness. The arrest was always meant to fail. We needed a public scapegoat, and you volunteered perfectly. Everything you just did on television was designed to expose you, not Jonathan." The revelation hit Ellen like a physical blow. She had been set up by her own people, used as a sacrificial lamb to protect the larger conspiracy. Her voice cracked as she looked at Jonathan with desperate confusion. "You knew. You knew this whole time, didn't you?" Jonathan's expression was filled with compassion rather than triumph. "Ellen, I've known about your handlers for 3 years. The FBI approached me because The Chosen was converting people they didn't want converted. But Ellen, the most important thing you need to understand is that you weren't their only victim. You were just their most visible one." Agent Martinez's voice returned through the phone, but this time she was addressing the audience directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed today is the collapse of a shadow network that has been controlling entertainment narratives for decades. Ellen DeGeneres was not the mastermind. She was a puppet who finally had her strings cut on live television." Ellen looked up at Jonathan through her tears, her voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you expose me privately? Why let me humiliate myself in front of the entire country?" Jonathan knelt beside her chair, his voice gentle but firm. "Ellen, because this was never about you. This was about freeing every performer, every actor, every entertainer who's been living under the same threats you've been living under. Sometimes the only way to break chains is to show the world they exist." The cameras captured Ellen's complete emotional breakdown as she realized that her greatest public humiliation might actually be her first moment of real freedom in 20 years. "I don't know who I am without their approval," she sobbed. Jonathan took her hands in his. "Ellen, would you like to find out? Because the God I serve specializes in taking people who've been used by darkness and giving them a chance to choose light instead." The most powerful woman in daytime television looked up at the man she had tried to destroy and asked the question that would define the rest of her life. "Is it too late for someone like me?" Jonathan's answer would break the internet and change Hollywood forever. "Ellen, it's never too late to come home." What happened in the 30 minutes after the cameras stopped rolling changed not just Ellen's life, but the entire landscape of American entertainment forever. As FBI agents flooded the Warner Bros. Studio to begin the largest corruption investigation in Hollywood history, Ellen made a decision that shocked everyone present. She asked Jonathan to stay, not as her guest, but as her guide through what she knew would be the hardest conversation of her life. "Jonathan," she said, her voice still shaking, "if I cooperate with the FBI, if I tell them everything about my handlers, about the network, about how they control who rises and falls in this industry, will God really forgive someone who spent 20 years destroying people for entertainment?" Jonathan's response was captured by a security camera that somehow found its way to social media, becoming the most shared spiritual moment in internet history. "Ellen, the God I serve didn't just die for the good people. He died especially for the people who thought they were too far gone to be saved. That includes media moguls who got trapped in systems bigger than themselves." Within hours, Ellen made the decision that would save not just her soul, but dozens of other celebrities who had been living under the same threats. She became the FBI's primary witness, providing recordings, documents, and testimony that led to the arrest of 17 high-level entertainment industry controllers and the exposure of a blackmail network that had been operating for over 30 years. But America's response to the footage went far beyond law enforcement. The original broadcast, despite network attempts to suppress it, hit 500 million views within 48 hours. Truth over fame became the #1 trending hashtag globally as millions of viewers shared their own stories of being controlled, manipulated, or silenced by systems of power. Churches across America reported the largest single-day increase in attendance in modern history as people sought to experience the same peace they had witnessed in Jonathan's response to false accusation. Even more remarkably, over 200 Hollywood actors, directors, and producers came forward with their own stories of being threatened, controlled, or blackmailed by the same network Ellen had exposed. 6 months later, a small video emerged that no major network would air, but that garnered more organic views than any professionally produced content that year. Ellen and Jonathan were sitting in a simple church in a small Tennessee town, not performing for cameras, but leading a support group for entertainment industry professionals, seeking recovery from what therapists were now calling fame trauma. Ellen looked directly into a handheld camera and said the words that completed her transformation. "I spent 20 years making people laugh because I was terrified of what they'd see if I stopped performing. Jonathan taught me that the most powerful thing you can do is let people see you exactly as you are, broken, searching, and desperate for something real." The final image that broke the internet wasn't from a professional studio or a red carpet event. It was a simple photograph of Ellen kneeling in a river, being baptized by Jonathan as dozens of other Hollywood figures waited their turn on the bank. The caption, written by Ellen herself, read, "Sometimes the arrest you think will destroy you is actually setting you free. If you're tired of performing your life instead of living it, there's hope. There's always hope." The post generated over 1 billion interactions, not because it was shocking, but because it was real. And in a world starving for authenticity, that reality became the most powerful force in entertainment, proving that sometimes the most compelling story isn't the one you script, but the one you let God write through your willingness to be broken on live television for the sake of truth.